Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. Every single week, I get to interview somebody amazing. Well, maybe 6 months ago or so, I interviewed Prescott Nadeau, what should we call him colloquially here? So Prescott is a public information officer out there on the East Coast. He has a lot of really great information. The way he does things, we call that disaster tough. He has really addressed all things PIO for us in the past. This week on the Disaster Tough podcast, we're going to be really honing in on working with the media, those press briefs that go out, actually talking about more of the how-to to do it, working through that, whether it's pre-recorded, whether it's live, how to deal with, what I would call, or what we've called off screen, the pouncing effect. How do you be first and right, all that other stuff and dealing with the media. And so without any further ado, I'm going to bring on this expert here, Prescott Nadeau. How you doing, man? It's good to see you,
John.
again.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure to talk to you because not only are you trained in communications, you really have done a great job on making sure you're doing it right. And as we're helping emergency managers across the country and really globally in terms of the audience size, we want to build on our capabilities across the field. And so this is such a great way where we have identified deficiencies really around, in any aspect of really emergency services that we need to get much better at. So thanks again for coming back on and talking to us about this stuff.
John, it's my pleasure, and I have to confess that same issue that you just described about the communications deficiencies across the board is exactly why I became a PIO and why, it's not as if I took this magic, pill that suddenly made me decent at anything PIO. It was trial, error, and as you can imagine, there were mistakes along the way.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what we're hoping to do here is helping other people not have to do those trial and errors by learning from people like you who have done the hard work and so kind of hit the ground running if they have to do that. There's so many emergency managers out there and really emergency services partners across the board who are given multiple hats. Sometimes they have a PIO for their department. Sometimes, hey, you're the emergency manager. You're also managing all of our social media accounts, which we're going to talk about in another episode, all these other things. But one of the things that I've noticed is the quality of press briefs can dramatically enhance or impact in a negative way your relationship with media partners because it can be very clear, it can be very confusing, and they will address those issues, right? So just talking about that scope of work here, I want to talk to you about the differences, and maybe you can give us kind of a rundown. When we say press brief, what are we talking about? And I know there's different forms of that. So when I say press brief to you as a PIO, what do you hear? What do you articulate that as?
All right. So press brief for me is going to be a written document, online, send it out to our media partners. It's going to be brief, succinct, just enough information in the right format that gets our media partners on board, not just understanding what happened, but hooking them in early so they want to read more. They want to then engage further, whether it be using that to, call me or my boss to find further information. Or as often happens, they just take that press brief, that media brief, and they turn it into a news article on their online websites, their social media, anything like that.
The magic word there you said was hook. I tell students at St. Louis University that, your job as a PIO is to sell. You're trying to get people to do something with the information you're providing, i.e. the intelligence. And that a brief, I've seen ones where it's long form, i.e. paragraph form, and it will be page after page after page. And I start to wonder who is actually reading that. And are you confused? Therefore, you're trying to explain it through paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And so what is the right balance? When you say brief and succinct, are you talking about bullet point? Are you talking about long form? What is the kind of a standard length that you would say is an appropriate length for a brief? Because again, it's a hook. So
yeah,
what is that for you?
So for me, I average one or two paragraphs, really depending on the scope of the incident. If we're at a 4 alarm structure fire with people, injured or trapped, it's going to be a little bit longer because there's more detail that needs to come out that the media is
Mm,
going to want to access. If it's an off-road rescue that was resolved fairly reasonable amount of time frame, one maybe two paragraphs is all we're dealing with. And the trick there is, once you have the hook, and I'll dive a little into some detail about what I mean by that hook. So the
mm,
very first thing with a hook is the title. I never
mm.
used to title my press releases, my media briefs. And
Interesting.
what I realized is that was just what a missed opportunity. So in the realms of things not to do, don't leave that out. You want that hook in there, and you want it to sound. I'm going to use the word newsy. Yeah, hope you can understand what that means.
Clickbait.
But exactly like if you said 4 alarm structure fire, okay, that's great. There was a fire and it went to 4 alarms. That's a little jargony. Maybe lose the 4 alarm piece there, but you know, uh, multiple injuries at warehouse fire in Williston.
Mm,
Something where, anything that can draw them in and make it sound newsy as far as like, wow, if this was in a news article, because guess what? Often the media doesn't have a ton of time to process your multiple page media brief, turn it into something usable, and then get it out to their constituents, which are your constituents. So if you
mm.
can literally present it to them in a fashion that with little tweaking they can get it out on their social media, on their websites, and in many cases on the media.
Real quick, we're going to pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at L3Harris.com right now. Instinct Ready kits are awesome, compact, fully loaded, and easy to place around your office, school, campus, warehouse, wherever. I keep a quick pack in my vehicle and one at home. Imagine Instinct Ready fully loaded Stop the Bleed kits in every school and office. Get Instinct Ready kits and training at InstinctReady.com. Okay, let's jump back in. It's one way to control your message, right? Because if you've given them a really great hook through a title, then they might want to use that hook. And so instead of saying like, firefighters scramble to do something that they have little training in, you can say firefighters respond to a mass casualty incident, whatever it may be. You want to control that narrative as much as possible, right? I mean, you don't want them to start guessing what 4 alarm means,
Oh,
right? They have no idea what 4 alarm means, by the way, right? Like they're trying to make sense of our industry jargon, which does bring up the question of, and we didn't really talk about this offline, is I have been addressing on the podcast the fact that we use a vernacular so often in our field that doesn't even match the dictionary definition of those words. And so we need to clean that up. Have you found instances in your career where you were saying something that you thought they would that would be common knowledge but wasn't, and you've had to explain that? Has there been any circumstances where we can say, oh, let's not, like, the almost like the do's and don'ts of creating a press brief?
yeah, and I mean, I think the major don't you've just hit on, which is the word jargon. If it's something that even at the very core of our being, we have engines, ladders, rescues is a big one. I learned the hard way that a rescue on the East Coast, even just Vermont versus New York City, for example, is a way different. Rescue could mean heavy rescue, could mean ambulance. I had people call me out on social media about
Mm,
that, basically saying, use better wording, choose wisely, young Padawan kind of thing.
mm,
The reality of it is, I learned a lot of hard lessons by using jargon, thinking that I was being maybe cool or hip or whatever. And one of the major learning lessons was talking to the media partners and having them off script,
mm,
offline, ask those questions and say, okay, what do you mean here? either before I go live with them or during a pre-recorded interview. Okay, you said this. What did you mean by that? And having to sit there and explain and say, man, I poorly assumed, that was common knowledge what those terms were. So,
Mm. Here's a fun one. One of my first like sit reps I sent out for a team I was on years ago. We had a team lead, and I wrote out a very long form explaining my reasoning of the cascading events that were going to happen if we do X, Y, and Z, what was going to happen. I was making justifications of why we need to spend a lot of money very quickly in areas that they weren't anticipating because of problems that I could foresee through analytics. But I recognized it was long form, right? Sometimes you have to do the long form. When I say long form, I'm talking about really diving into the weeds of all the information because it can go to like Congress, right? So there's some of that, but that's really outside of press briefs. But in any case, what I did in the email when I sent out all the stuff at the very top, I wrote a vernacular that was very my generation of TLDR, too long, didn't read. And so one sentence, I kind of like bluff. I should have just used bluff. Bottom line up front, it's a military term. A lot of people understand that one in our field. But instead of saying bluff, I said TLDR. And my team lead was so confused by that. The next morning, he came up to me and he was like, "What does DL or DR mean?" He's like, "Disaster? Are you talking about the disaster declaration? What are you trying to explain?" And I said, "Oh, TLDR, too long didn't ring." He's like, "Oh, I thought you were addressing me only and calling me out on something." And so, again, trying to be cool or hip or whatever, I also just confused them. However, I think at one point we need to say, hey, we're communicating with the public, and the public does have, sounding cool and hip can help get a message out if that's what you're trying to, if that's who your audience is of trying to help them. So it's a really good call out there of like knowing the audience, making sure you're speaking the right language, that kind of stuff. In
now,
terms of, please,
just super quick on that.
yeah,
And this is it's complementing the point, but also, so one of the things that I do with a lot of my press briefs, my main audience is, of course, the press. It's a press brief. I want to get it out to them so they can get it to the constituents. But all of my press briefs go on social media as well.
mm,
And my social media audience is arguably different than the press.
absolutely,
So, tail end of a lot of my press briefs, I will include maybe not jargon so much, but I definitely include, for example, the apparatus and number of people that responded, right?
mm,
The media doesn't always care about that.
mm,
But a lot of our constituents who follow us on social media actually are interested to know, what was your staffing profile? What apparatus did you respond with?
mm,
Occasionally, the media has thrown that in, like, hey, wow, they had 3 people for this incident. That doesn't seem like a lot. Um,
mm.
so I do walk that line of really the important information, bluff the important information up front, but also ensuring that because I know it's going on social media, I do throw a few lines in there for those viewers as well.
Perfect. And so you're covering your bases there. Walk us through getting in front of the media. So you got this hook, you have the press brief. There's a big difference between a pre-recorded event and a live event. How do you address both of those things? What is your relationship there with those types of events? And we can talk about in a second maybe the relationship with your media partners, because that has been vilified so much about the different ends of the spectrum. But for the sake of pre-recorded versus live, what as emergency managers who may get in front of the media, what do they need to learn from you?
So I'll start with pre-recorded because arguably there is a little bit less stress there versus the big live event kind of deal.
Hmm.
Pre-recorded is easier than live because you have that discretionary time. And the most important thing to remember, the number one thing to remember with pre-recorded interviews, is there are always second takes, and you should
Mm.
use them. I can't tell you the number of times where I just shot my shot and said, "Oh, well, I hope that sounded good," knowing full well that if I'm asking myself, "Wow, I hope that sounded good," it probably didn't.
Mm.
Uh,
It's good.
I am now to the point where almost every single time I'm interviewed by the media, I ask for it at some point. I ask, "Hey, can I try that again, or do you mind if I try that again?" Because
Mm,
at the end of the day, when I have started to do that, the second take is, generally speaking, much better and ends up as exactly what I wanted to say versus
mm.
just piecemealing it out.
How do you so if so this is the question I think a lot of people are going to ask, right? Because that media relationship can seem fragile at times. Do you think, because now you're a pro at asking that, do you think they are okay with you asking that? Have you had a experience where you've been, not experience, but how did you get the enough gumption or courage or whatever to say, hey, can I do this a second time and trust that they'll play the second take? How do you judge that situation?
So initially, it was me being a little bit humble about being able to say, "Oof, I'm really nervous, you guys. I don't. I This is like my third, fourth, fifth, whatever. I'm just really nervous." And having them open up and say, "Yeah, that's totally understandable." And they would say to me, almost every single time, they would say something along the lines of, "Hey, you can always do it again if if you didn't like it."
Mm,
The other secret squirrel piece that in developing those relationships, I have media partners that I consider friends, and we text back and forth. They reach out to me, I reach out to them. One of the things now that I've developed that level of relationship is the admonition that they want the best take as well, and they're
mm,
never going to say that to you. You are kind enough to stand in front of their camera and give them any soundbite. They're going to take whatever they can get, but
mm,
in the back of their head, there are times where they probably wanna say like, "Ooh, any chance you wanna do that again?" But they never will, because it's rude, that.
yeah.
So more often than not, the fear definitely shouldn't be, "Oh, are they gonna use take 1, take 2?" If you have expressed, "Man, can I do this just one more time?"
Mm,
They they're producing, editing and producing it, within that same day, often within the same few hours. So they're
mm,
gonna remember the conversation. They're gonna remember that desire and ultimately speaking, John, here's the best part that I've heard from so many media partners. We want to make you look good. It's
mm,
our job to make you look good. And just even hearing that, I mean, I'm not a vain human being. I don't need them to, get the fluffy side of my hair here. What they're talking about is if they go through and are editing, and this has happened to me a few times where I've, interviewed for a few solid minutes,
mm,
and what comes out on camera is about 2.5 seconds. I know that they are doing me a favor. I know that they went through and said,
mm.
we'll use some of his words scripted in our way more on the print brief.
So on the national stage, there's definitely going to be audience members who are listening to this and be like, man, that doesn't feel true. Like they try to make people look bad. Like you'll go on these major websites. I always find it hilarious where the article headline will be the clickbait headline, right? But the picture they choose is like the individual like sneezing or like like they'll choose like the worst possible photo, and I always feel like it's some intern thinking it's hilarious to do that, therefore I feel like it's hilarious, but they're also doing the clickbait. And so again, like, because you're a PIO, your profession is them, right? Building those relations as a PIO. How do you start building those, gaining those relationships, especially when sometimes it doesn't feel like, I'm talking a while here, but there are so many people in emergency services who are like, oh, I can never talk to the media because they're going to try to make me look bad.
Yes.
But I have found, I'm a podcaster, and so my scope is a little different here. I don't consider myself media because it's pre-recorded and educational. At the same time, anytime I've interviewed people who are in the media or work with the media, they're like, "Hey, we have these relationships. If I help them, they want to help me. Therefore, there's this like mutual respect and relationship that gets built." How do you develop that? Why should emergency services not be afraid to talk to the media?
I think the first and foremost thing is there is a little I hope I don't get any naysayers to this, but there is a difference between local media and national media. I'm just going to
Mm,
come right out and say it. And those words were actually spoken by some of our local media conglomerates who tend to agree that there is a difference. That said,
good point.
mean we should shy away from that. I've only had one instance in my career in which we have had an incident so large that it actually garnered national media attention, and I was interviewed by national and local media outlets.
Mm,
Here's the trick. Developing those relationships starts local, but when those national media conglomerates came into the picture, I treated them with respect as well. I
mm,
obviously heeded my local partners first and foremost because they are that developed a relationship for years, and they are going to be with me for years in the
mm.
future. But that doesn't
Smart.
mean I can't speak to and engage the national media partners with a solid amount of respect. And honestly, at the end of the day, we are both human beings. And so if you
Mm,
greet them, you shake their hand, you say, "Hey, listen, this is my first time on a national media outlet. I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm going to give you, everything that you need to the best of my ability." Automatically, they're going to be taken aback. Sort of, I'm used to just getting my soundbite and being done. It's like, let's talk. Let's have
mm.
that few minutes of conversation before we get on, and maybe after we get on, after we get off the live stream or even the pre-recorded bit, to let you know that I'm human too.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I think it's, you know, like I said, anytime I've interacted with the media, to remember they're not there just to do their job. Like they're humans too, right? And so anytime you have an opportunity to sell, right? This is coming back to that, like, is good, and that does mean building relationships with people. The best salespeople in the world are not the and hopefully this is not disrespectful, not the used car salesman approach where it's like push 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 push, get in get out, but it's relationship building, long term, having mutual respect, people treating people with dignity, recognizing they're trying to do their job, at the same time never giving swaying on where you stand on the issue and be able to push. So really great call outs there. When you do get out and you have to talk to the media, can you provide some tips of like, make sure you do X, Y, and Z in your preparation of that, and really how to do that appropriately?
Mhm. I'll hit real quick on the pre-recorded and jump into live, because arguably
Sure.
live is the more intense one, and it scares
Hmm.
people the most, to the point where most people actually refuse to do live, which is fine if you are out there and don't appreciate that. There are other people that they will find to do that, but I want to
Mm,
arm you with some information that might help you. Next time they ask you to engage in that, because it actually is a lot of fun, and the more you do it, at the end of the day, the more you do any of it, pre-recorded or live, the more comfortable you will feel.
mm,
And then your name and your message, your department's name, your department's message will be out there that much more. That's why we PIOs exist, is to get to the right information to the right people at the right time. So what I'll say is, I did this one just for you here. So before any pre-recorded message, or live for that matter, both of these tips are applicable. Make sure you give yourself enough time. If the media is on a time crunch and you only have, for example, 30 minutes until they show up at your door, that's okay. 30 is more
mm,
than 10. But if you can give yourself about an hour, if you can push them out a little bit, that gives you time to prepare mentally. And arguably the most important bit of preparation is write 3 bullet points down. Take
mm,
3 bullet points on the topic they're looking. Don't go over, don't go under. 3 is for me, I've found that it's perfect, because if it's a pre-recorded piece, they want that. They might only, later that night on the newscast, they might only put one of my 3, but I've
mm,
got 3 messages out there, and the first one I put out there is typically the one I hope they will use if they
mm.
do choose to only use one. So
Right.
for today, this is what I put out there today, for my little, and there we go.
So a compliment John's hair. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Those are my notes. Those are my notes to make sure that I,
For those who
don't.
are audio only, wait, can you pull it up on the screen? I'll
Oh,
just read it
oh
real
yeah,
fast.
yeah, for sure.
Don't say anything silly. I like silly things, so you're okay. Say smart things. Compliment John's hair. Yeah, with the in there. That's great. Yeah.
So make sure you put your 3 bullet points down there. I have been known to, of course, do some sub bullet points as well if they
Mm,
want to embellish a little bit. But at the end of the day, whether it's pre-recorded or live, when the camera starts, even if you're a seasoned PIO, you're still going to be nervous. Those nerves are still going to hit. And if you
mm,
have 3 things in your head, even myself, who is super scatterbrained most of the time, one or all 3 of those, frankly, will come to bear.
So 3 bullet points. First bullet point's the thing that's most important. Do you usually start with compassion, need to know, or need to do? What do you usually start off with when you're talking about, like, something that's happened? Is it more informational for you, or are you communicating to the public, like, these houses burned down, therefore, condolences out to the families, this is what we did. Like, how do you approach that compassion versus
Need to know.
data, i.e., logical stuff? Yeah.
So live briefings are always need to know, and I never ever forget the compassion piece, and that is such, John. I'm actually really happy you mentioned that because the need to know is why a lot of people are tuning in. They want that instant, same exact thing with the hook and having the inverted triangle for your press
Mm,
briefs, making sure you put the information they need right away. But ending with that compassion piece, again, it goes back to them recognizing that you're a human being. And for
mm.
anyone who is stuck with the message to that point, it might resonate more if you add and include that compassion piece.
Yeah,
So yeah.
you talk about the inverted triangle. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, in essence, what that is, and it sounds a little strange because I think many of us think of the peak of a triangle of a pyramid as being, uh, the pinnacle of it, very top. But in this case, if you invert it, what they're basically the idea for that in a press brief is put the bulk of that information, what you need, right at first, paramount, right? So
Mm,
that hook, that title, and then the who, what, where, when, why, really comes immediately after that hook. You want to give them that, like I said, maybe a 2 paragraph press brief. Nail it with that first paragraph, all the information they need in that first paragraph. The second one is where you can dive a little bit more into some detail. Here's what I want to stress though. Although the inverted triangle, everything, you want to get the important who, what, where, why, what out there first. That second paragraph shouldn't be understated because what I do in my second paragraph or the tail end of the first, whatever I have room and time for, is I put the message out there that I want to get across. So the important piece is, there was a train derailment or there was a structure fire, there was an off-road rescue. Here's some basic and important details related to that. Boom. The next thing is the people on the off-road rescue were dressed appropriately. They had a charged cell phone. They had a space blanket. Hey, the people at the structure fire evacuated as soon as the smoke alarm sounded. They had working smoke detectors. They had tested them a week before. Draw that public safety, community risk reduction message in that
mm.
second paragraph.
Fantastic. And I love that approach of, like, hey, all these things help them in this incident, and always drawing it back to readiness there. Rounding out this conversation, we've already been talking about, writing up your brief. We talked about pre-recorded. We want to talk about live here in a second. We haven't really talked about live. But you're really talking about organizing this experience to make sure that the narrative is the information, compassion, getting people to do something based off of that. When you get in there and you've already built all these relationships, you've already done this stuff, now you're in this live experience. Why should you said it could be fun? Why should emergency managers, responders, people across the board want to get out in front of a live? And why shouldn't they be afraid? I think it's also really fun, by the way. But what is your pitch? And I'll give my pitch after you give your pitch.
I am actually really excited for for this, but for me, and for hopefully a lot of other people, the reason it can be fun is as soon as you get over the public speaking piece, as soon as you're able to reconcile the fact that that is, it can be scary at first, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you will be. You recognize the power that the media has. We see it
Mm,
every single day: print media, social media, on the television, everywhere, right? Um, the power that they have, we can harness that power for good.
mm.
And realistically, as a PIO, that is our job. So the more comfort we can get, the more engaged we can have with our media partners. That's where it becomes fun when we begin knowing. I can call a lot of our media partners by name. I have their cell phone to be able to reach out and say, "Hey, we have this story. Are you interested in doing it?"
Mm.
That's where the conversation, like you and I are having right now, in a relaxed manner, can happen with our media partners versus, oh my goodness, I don't, the media is coming in 20 minutes. I'm so nervous. I don't know what to say. Those feelings, I promise you, will subside over time.
Yeah, I agree. The feelings go away once you've done it a couple times. It's like trying anything new. It feels like there's a lot of pressure because you're like, oh my gosh, like it's gonna. My thing is, in 7 seconds, everyone's gonna forget it, and
I like
so
that.
unless you're talking about a drought and how everybody needs to conserve water, and at the same time you're drinking like a like there's always like the fun briefs where like that kind of stuff happens. Or there was a mayor, I believe, in Toronto, who got mad at the media, said we're ending it no matter what, no more questions. And somebody immediately asks a question, he turns around and starts answering more questions. It's super funny. Like those moments do happen, but those moments are rare and they get played a lot, so it makes it feel like it happens all the time. But really, more often than not, you immediately were able to positively impact the disaster in such a real way by getting that power of the media. You are just able, especially when it's live, you're able to tell so many people what you actually want to tell them. There's no more what trickle down economics here. You immediately went from A to Z lightning fast. And
Yes.
one of the problems that we have in our field is just getting people to do the things that we want them to do. Now we don't have to go through 50 steps to do that. You immediately got to say, hey, please evacuate. I'm a professional in this. Stuff is dangerous. Please leave. And then the not even the media, but the constituents, the people hearing that, they're like, "Oh, hey, that fire chief just said that. That PIO just said that. That emergency manager just said that." It has a lot more weight to it when they get to see the responder. And then again, it's a pretty good pitch that professionals are in charge of this, not the reporter. The reporter is just relaying the information. So I think anytime people can get out in front of live media, they should. 3 bullet points, excellent advice there. Knowing what you wanna say, sticking to only that. That level of compassion also very important. My experience is mostly type 1 events. And so, the active shooter, the bomb threat, the type 1, the category, 4 or 5 hurricane, all that stuff when there's like a lot of people impacted. And so my experience is everybody wants to know it. But again, full circle here, 7 seconds. Immediately after that's one, they're going to the next person and they're interviewing some politician. And so now I don't matter at all anyways. So might as well, just get up in front of there, give that chance. Speaking of that, not the PIO isn't the only person getting in front of the media. The PIO is also typically in charge. Like if you're representing an organization, it could be the CEO, it could be the director, it could be, the political appointee, whoever. As somebody who has worked with the media so much, what would be your advice to help the I would say like that research and development phase, getting the right information fastest to the right people so that when they go out the media, you're not like, you're like, oh, fantastic. They said what we wanted them to say. How do you work within that realm? Could you give some advice there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, in
Yeah, for sure.
helping just a little bit, I
Yeah.
think the thing that I would say is, and I would repeat this to anyone, whether it be, I'm fortunate my fire chief is very well spoken. I don't ever worry when he gets up in front of the camera. Same thing, our town manager. But the reality of it is there's folks that, if we were at a type 1 incident right now, there'd be a lot of folks who might be appearing for their first time or not
Mm.
a ton of time behind the camera. Be brief, be brilliant, and be gone.
Ooh, I like
It's
that.
yeah, it's not mine. I wish I could give credit to someone in particular, but during my FEMA PIO classes, that was the moniker, and it was be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. And that is what I would tell, anyone who
Mm.
came to me either for advice or frankly, I would even give it unsolicited before they got up in front of the camera. Um, because arming them, my job as the PIO to give them those 3 bullet points and say, hit on these 3 things. And then, John, I'll go back to what you said earlier in the conversation, hit on these 3 things, but end with this one. And this one is the compassion piece because,
Mm.
7, 8 seconds, they're going to forget the whole message anyhow. But if they have one of those 3 bullet points in their head that the public does,
Mm.
that relationship, they're going to say, man, that town manager, the city manager, that member of the board, whoever it is up there, the mayor, they were
Mm.
great. I'm gonna, they became or are going to become my trusted source. And when we're dealing with large scale incidents, everyone is looking to have a trusted source. If you
Mm.
walk up there, you have your few bullet points and you end on compassion, you are brief, you are brilliant, and you are gone. They will come back to you the next time you get up because you're going to schedule another briefing and say, there will be another update in X period of time. Man, I'm going to tune in because I trust them.
Speaking of that, can you give some general guidance? I know every incident's different. We always have that, whether that's true or not. The general guidance on frequency of talking to the media. What is their expectation? And when something big happens, is it every 15 minutes? Is it every hour? Is it, is it every ops period? What is the level of expectation in terms of, again, general guidance that you can provide somebody who is looking to get in front of the media?
So you nailed it. It is obviously situational dependent, but without using that as my cop out, the ops period works really great. Those 12-hour periods, or whenever you can get out there, to the initial briefing and say, hey, we'll be back in a few hours, 4, 5, 6. The reality of it is, though, if this is a large scale incident and things are transpiring on an hourly basis, that is the frequency that you need to go back in front of the camera. If you are doing every hour on the hour press briefs, and the third hour in, you're saying the exact same thing,
Mm.
perhaps you could expand that a little further and say, okay, we'll be back in a few hours, a couple of hours, something like that. But if
Mm.
every hour on the hour, you have new, updated information, it goes back to that trust piece. People want to hear it, and people will continue to tune in to listen.
Fantastic. You are brief, brilliant, and now you're going to be gone. Hang up. No. If you like this podcast, if you like this episode, you like what Prescott said, please tune in every week. We love having audience members tell us what they want to hear about. So if you've gotten something out of this podcast episode, please, please, please let us know in the comments on all social media channels. We're really big on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, not really Twitter, but we try whatever your form of communication is. Let us know the things that you've learned. If you've got in front of the media and it has gone good, bad, or ugly, let us know, and maybe we can give you some tips across the field. And with that being said, give us that 5-star rating and subscribe if you haven't yet, and we'll see you for the next one.